Morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Postgres Pulse. I'm your host, Jamie Watt, and with me is my cohort, Josh Heyer, as well as two men who require no introduction whatsoever, but are going to get one nonetheless. We've got Bruce Momjian as well as Vibhor Kumar. So, for those of you who haven't attended before, our goal here is really just to have a conversation about Postgres with those who are, of course, using it. And secondly, to kind of help you with any problems or challenges you might have, or at least to talk through problems that you have had and maybe get something valuable out of the discussion. This really doesn't, it's irrespective of where your Postgres might be, whether it's in the cloud or it's on-prem or it's in containers. We're here to help and discuss at the very least. So, we do a twofold approach. The first is we have a blog that runs parallel to what we do here. The second is we've got the weekly discussions that we do here. This week's topic, along with our blog, was related to a problem that we had seen with one of our customers, where they had had performance behaving normally up until the last week or so, and they started to see some of their queries trail off in terms of performance. They reached out to us and asked, what do I do? What's the problem? How can we understand what the cause is and how can we get past this? So we pointed them in direction of a specific tool because we had kind of already had an understanding of what their environment looked like. But we wanted to get a bigger, deeper dive into what it is that they were experiencing from the Postgres side. Now, we were able to walk into that with an understanding of the environment as well as the typical do's and don'ts where you're diving into a performance issue in any environment. But we wanted to be able to walk through that here because I think that's really the nuts and bolts of how you solve a problem in Postgres and really in any sort of technical solution. So you want to obviously step away from the environment. And in my experience, I've looked through both the storage layer, the virtualization, as well as other pieces of the fabric. But Bruce, I'd be curious to hear kind of how you think you approach things, both in the past as well as present, whether or not anything's changed and what seems to be the most effective manner. Sorry, Bruce, you're talking on mute.
Wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without forgetting to turn off mute, right? So I've been doing this a long time, and there's always a bias you have when you walk in. You're like, oh, it must be the optimizer. It must be that guy in that department I don't like. You know, I mean, it's like
the butler did it. He looks all shit.
Yeah, I'm like, it's Monday morning. He didn't look good today. I know he's causing this. You know, I'm gonna find a way. But what I found in actual practice is that your emotional sort of feeling for it really doesn't always work. And probably the biggest thing is to be prepared. To be prepared for somebody to come in and say something doesn't work. And if you're not prepared, you know, you better get prepared, because by the third time, if you're not learning how to get better prepared for these problems, because as soon as the problem arrives, you're on the clock. Clock's ticking. Something's not working. Something's not being produced. And if you have to scramble around to put together a whole bunch of information, you're wasting time. So what I normally approach it as, instead of sort of launching into the report that they tell me, right, is the user may have a perspective on, they're going to have a perspective on the problem, but that's usually not the actual problem. Of course, if an error message comes up, okay, we know exactly what it is. They're giving me the error message. I can go look to that. But for the majority of problems that come to me are not like simple, hey, the syntax is wrong, right? They're usually these things like, it doesn't feel right, it's slow, I'm not getting the results I should have, I'm missing something. And it's always, you always get like 40% of the whole problem, right?
Sure.
So I'm always looking to prepare myself with alerting and sort of understanding the whole stack of what's going on, because if the system's slow, I may stare at the database, but if somebody's running a non-database job at 2 p.m. that's consuming a huge amount of memory and IO, it's not going to show up in the database. It's going to, I'm going to see the queries are slow, but the cause is not in the database. So to look in the database, it's like, you know, I lost my keys, but I'm going to look down the street because the light's better over there, right? You don't want to be have to swayed on where you can get information. Ideally, you've got an infrastructure set up that's going to warn you when your load average is high, right? When your memory is low, when your IO channel queue length is long, when when your smart devices, smart monitoring is reporting some kind of errors. I even have it set up so every time I get a kernel message, if I haven't whitelisted, I get an email. So that like when something goes berserk and it's like can't connect to device, or it's got a weird packet and it doesn't know what to do with, or your security is starting to throw errors. A lot of times they get just thrown in the kernel unless you're looking at the kernel all the time. You don't even notice it, right? So instead of running to the database to the cause, I want to have it. I want to either check all the layers beneath me, or I want to have alerting so when they come in, I know there's nothing going on down there because I've received no alerts at this at all. So that's usually a lot of people who do administration are just focused on, I'm the database guy, I just want to worry about that. Well, it's sort of like saying, I'm going to build a house, but I'm not going to worry about the foundation at all.
Right.
Like you can't do that. You might want to do it, but I've had people, being a homeowner for a long time where I had a problem and I'll point the guy at the problem. I'm like, there's a problem here. And the problem ends up being something completely different, right? I was getting water coming up the drain in my basement. The gutters were too small, right? Like what's the distance from the basement drain to the gutter? It's pretty far, right? But I had a bunch of people coming in and they'd stare at it. They look at the sub pump and they look at whatever. One guy came in and they said, your problem is your gutters, and your gutters are draining right next to your foundation, and that's putting water pressure in its pressure. I'm like, of course, right? So that's the kind of guy you want to be. You want to be the person.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, right? Because it takes a lot of background knowledge just to be able to look at a situation and know that.
Right.
But if you're collecting information up front, you buy the house, you're not expected to be a hydronics expert. But if you're getting the information ahead of time on where's the water table here, how much shed can my French drains get rid of, now you can make that determination without having to know, the having to have seen these things hundreds of times in the past.
Yeah, and that's why you bring in the experts, because the experts will look right away and they're like, that's not working. This roof is too big for those gutters. That gutter pipe is going right down along the side of the foundation. You got to dig a trench and get it out away from the house, and the problem went away, right? And that's the same thing with the database.
But failing having somebody who's already made all these mistakes hundreds of times, you can at least set up monitoring so that when stuff goes south, you've got a nice dossier of everything that led into
right. But at the same time, you've got to be aware of what to monitor. So like there's been a bunch of cases where I know this one area can be a problem. So I'll just set up monitoring just on that thing, right? And anything and I'll filter out, I'll say, I'm expecting this error message and this error message. Those I'm going to ignore. Anything that isn't those, I want to get an alert right away about it, right? So you're right. You're going to set up monitoring, but you also have to kind of be aware of what to look for. Smart tools. A lot of people don't even know they exist. They don't know storage devices have them. They don't know how to turn it on. And if you don't have smart monitoring running, then you have to wait for a drive failure, and then you replace the drive, and you still may not know that I could have been warned about it if I knew the smart monitoring exists. So you have to look at where your failure places are and then start to find out, how do I find out, oh, I know I can have a problem where I'm low on memory. Okay, I need to put something in place. What's a normal parameter of how much free memory I should have? When do I start to worry when it gets too low? A lot of times those don't come out of the box. You have to like configure them, so I think you have to worry about the low levels first, and get the monitoring in place, and then you can start to look at the database. And PgBadger is a great tool, but it's not going to show you an IO error. It's not going to show you low memory. It's not going to show you that your CPUs are saturated from some non-database task that's happening, in some other office.
Right. And I think that's a great point, right? So what we had focused on in the blog and what we're going to talk about in a bit with respect to PgBadger, it's one of the strong tools out there. However, just having the tool belt with the right tools in it doesn't make any one of us a plumber. You've got to have the background, right? The goal is to make it the least expensive set of efforts possible to be able to either question everything or be able to question exactly what you should to get into the cause of the problem itself, right? Vibor and I were talking a short while ago this morning about the notion of questioning everything, right? So getting into the model, and don't just assume that the world of underpinnings of the math around you is going to be right all the time, right? So you take a look at whether it be smart monitoring or you're looking at your network health with
network health is a big one. Like I'm pinging stuff every 15 minutes, and
Yep.
then when I get an error, and then I get another error maybe the next day, and then the third day my wife says, hey, I start typing, it couldn't do anything. I'm like, I think I know what it is, because I've received 2 alerts that I've never received before, all right, on that particular device. So that means that something, in that case, it was a Mocha adapter that had gone bad. So
that is easily the best justification for home network monitoring. I just want to say, like, that's the selling point right there. So that's the scenario I want to fix.
Yeah, and my aunt, my aunt said my laptop is off, and I had gotten an alert that her laptop was not responding to a ping. So I said, well, I got an alert at 6:15 last night that your laptop wasn't, or it was that night. So earlier in the evening, got an alert that it wasn't responding. And she said, oh, I was vacuuming like maybe an hour before that. And she had unplugged the electric cable, and, it ran out of battery, and then it died, and I'm like, okay, I think we know what the cause is there. Just if you need a better plug connector, I can make sure it's a little tighter. She said, no, I'm good, but just having that information, before somebody comes to you, and, I know there's a problem. I saw it went offline around 6:15. It might have, I think it might be, something pretty simple.
So that actually points back to an example that comes to mind. So, and Vibor, I want to get your take on this specifically. A few years ago, we had run into a very large-scale performance issue with a customer back in 2016, early 2017, where we were looking at everything across their environment. Why are their TPS crawling to a halt? Why do we see that their average queries are running at about 6,000, peaking at 8,000? What's the cause of the load that they see on their system? And one of the root causes was actually very simple. And Vibor, you were at the fore of that entire engagement. So I'd kind of like to hear that from your view.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting, I would say, story to tell about the customer, right? We were looking at the TPS, and TPS was not going up. And we were looking at multiple problems, what is going on with the system itself.
Yep. Storage.
There were 2 things which, the third thing came up later too. First was the disk IO, right? You did not have the enough IO on the system so that PostgreSQL can perform well. And then we decided, okay, we want to get more IOs to the system. And the easiest way to get those IOs was adding a multiple mount points and creating a multiple table spaces so that you can spread the data across multiple disks and you get better IO. And of course, we saw a bump in the performance. So we said, wow, that's awesome. So we started looking into the other part of the system too. We looked into the system, we found that there was a CPU bottleneck too, because after 216 connections, the performance was started going down. And when we looked into the stat, we found that there were a lot of context switching happening between the CPUs. And that was a main cause.
Right.
Yeah. And then we said, okay, let's see if we can add more CPUs and how the performance will behave, right? And we added more CPUs, and we saw again, there's a bump in the performance, and we said, wow.
Yeah.
So it clearly indicates that PostgreSQL itself is not a bottleneck, right? Because it's an environment in which PostgreSQL survive or live is a key thing. So when you're doing the monitoring, you don't only monitor the PostgreSQL component itself, you would like to monitor the whole environment. as Bruce mentioned, the whole stack. The
Yep.
low-level stack also makes sense, where you want to monitor, you want to check how things are going, how things are progressing. And this also reminded me one more, my past experience, where at 2 to 3 p.m., people started coming to me and said, hey, PostgreSQL is not performing well, right? I said, okay, what is going on there? So we started asking questions.
Right.
We looked
Define
into the,
well.
yeah, we looked into the network. We said, network is fine, speed is good, but it was interestingly unplanned patch somebody was running on the system. Nobody knew about that. And PostgreSQL log file will not tell you, right? So we figured out that part by looking into the system log file, where whenever you apply any patches, it captures information what is running. And of course, the top command showed us that which process taking more time. And that clearly indicated, okay, this is the problem. We decided, okay, let's create a policy that whenever we are going to push any patches, we are going to inform users and customers that there will be patch and roll out happening in this particular period, and they may be as impact on the performance of the system. But yeah, so overall, when you're monitoring, you're not, or when you're checking the log file, of course, PostgreSQL log file makes sense. With that, you would like to see the environmental log file, like system log files or network system you want to monitor, create an alert around that. So all those are important components which you would like to monitor.
Right. And especially when you're looking across multiple sites, right? You then have to take into consideration the link. Is it a private link? Is it a virtual private link?
Yes.
Is it shared? Is there something that's happening in between? Do you have to do something like not just a packet trace, but basically, listen across the line to see whether or not there's any sort of noise? Like there's so many attributes that you have to take into consideration that, we see within support at EDB, and I've seen elsewhere where you've really got to question the environment and the symptoms that you see in front of you to understand what the cause might be and where you actually have to work toward getting a fix, right?
Correct.
Okay, and actually in line with that, we wanted to dive a little bit into PgBadger itself to show not necessarily only what we articulated in the blog, but kind of how once you've got that knowledge within your virtual speaking belt, right, your metaphorical belt, when you actually start having a need to apply specific tools against it, then it's good to kind of get a feel for some of the more robust ones out there and how to go about winnowing down your problem from vague symptom to a cause and ultimately a solution. So to that end, one of the more common ones out there in open source is actually PgBadger. And as I mentioned, we talked about it in the blog this week, and we're going to walk through a little bit of it here. And Vibhor, I'd certainly love to hear some commentary as where you've used this in the past and what you've been able to glean from this as a consequence of getting this into a given environment. It's fairly lightweight, right? So that's one of the advantages that we see.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a very interesting tool, I would say. The motivation behind the PgBadger was filling the gap which we had seen with the old version of a tool called pgfoin. So before PgBadger, we had a tool called pgfoin, and it used to give us the information about the SQLs running on the system, the performance time it is consuming on the PostgreSQL side. So it used to give all those details, but we did not have the tool which can give us a report, which can summarize the overall activity happening based on the log files of the PostgreSQL. And that's why the PgBadger came in the picture. So if you have a proper logging parameter set on the PostgreSQL side, and PostgreSQL is logging those information correctly into the log file, you can use this tool to generate one report which can give you a complete view exactly what's going on in your PostgreSQL side. Again, it's only focused on the Postgres side of the activity, not really at the IO level, network level, any other level. So in PgBadger, you can see, interestingly, in the overview page, you get more information like global stats, right? Where you can find more information about number of, maybe I need to increase the font a little bit, but yeah, it gives you the information about the SQL traffic,
That help?
Right, exactly. How the queries are performing based on it aggregates those stat information, tells you how the queries are performing. It will give you the information on queries per second, 5 minutes average, gives you the information about the connections. So if you want to know exactly how the connections are coming to your database, it gives you the information about connection per database, connections per user. It can give you that details too. Um, and you can look into the whole information here, and you can easily understand which user from which particular IP address the most connections are coming. Whether it may be possible there is a connection leak happening at the application side, you would be able to figure out by looking at this one, because if you have a previous day report and today's report, you can compare together and find out which connection is taking more time, or which is the user making a more connection to the database. There is other interesting part which you can see, the checkpoints performance. Checkpoint is very, very important in PostgreSQL. If you don't tune it correctly, it may impact the performance of a database, right? So you would like to tune it correctly. And you can see the checkpoint performance altogether from this particular page. Again, to get this information, you need to have a parameter called log underscore checkpoints equals to on in PostgreSQL conf file. Very interesting information you can get it. The other thing which is very interesting is temp files. Temp files tells you.
Before you move on to that,
Yeah.
just a quick question. You said if you don't have checkpoints configured correctly, you're going to have a real problem. What's that look like? What would you be looking for in this graph to see that you've misconfigured your checkpoints?
So if your checkpoint is happening very frequently or too frequently, right? This chart, there will be a graph, you will be able to see that it's continuously spiking on the system, which impacts the IO of the machine. So your queries will perform slow because they won't get the enough IO bandwidth, because checkpoint is also taking that kind of a bandwidth or IO bandwidth.
So you got a big spike in added, and it
Yeah.
just keeps going up and up and up, and then
Yeah.
remove doesn't catch up until minutes later, hours later.
Yeah. And it gives
you know
the information.
you've got an imbalance here someplace. You have
Correct.
too many
And it
writers
also gives you
and
the,
not enough readers.
yeah, and you can also get one more information from the chart, that during which period your checkpoint is happening more frequently. It may be possible you have tuned your system properly, and overall checkpoint is not happening very frequently, but in some time window when there is a load on the system, checkpoint may happen very frequently, and you would like to further tweak it or tune it. The other
This comes
piece
back again to, you want to see these things laid out in time so that you can correlate as many as possible, or as many as are relevant with the effect that you're seeing.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks.
And this is a one more interesting chart which tells you about the queries per database. Number of queries are coming to your database and how they are performing. So this is a very interesting. It also gives you the information about queries by user. Number of queries are coming to the user. Again, when you look at these queries, you will know exactly how many connections queries are coming from a specific user. It just only gives you the information about the performance of the queries. Like if number of queries are performing well within 2 seconds, it means your throughput is very good, right? If it is taking more time, then this throughput is not so good. So it gives you some kind of a good idea, vague idea, I would say. But let's say if you want to find out the slowest query running on the system, right? Then you can go to the top. There's a top thing also.
Right.
Yeah, histogram. So you can see it gives you a rank and tells you the queries which were performing slow or taking more time on the system. And you can look into those queries. The best part which I found with the PgBadger is that in case if you're running a prepared statement, right, it also gives you some input values which you can play with. You can check the explain plan to see whether it is a problem with the way you have designed the schema, or whether you're missing any indexes or something else, right? So this is also a very interesting thing which I found with the PgBadger. Other part is called temp files. Temp files is very important. You would like to monitor your temporary files creation in the PostgreSQL side.
Yep.
So you can think about this way: if your query doesn't have enough work, ma'am, it try to swap out some information to the disk in the form of temp files. So if temp files is getting created a lot on the system, the only possible reason which we can think about is that you don't have enough work mem so for the query performance. So you
Sure.
would like to tweak or tune your work mem parameters based on the information which you get from
Right.
temp files. But these are the
Ultimately,
important things. Yeah,
yeah, so there's a lot of things you can do with this, right? It's kind of a
correct.
Swiss Army knife, but unfortunately, it's also got a number of blades on it, right? So you
Yeah,
got to make sure that you know how to actually how to work the tools, right? So that you understand what it is you're looking for. It goes back to before you throw on the tool belt, make sure you've got some of the knowledge behind it, right?
absolutely.
There's some
Yeah,
other tools that we've talked about in separate discussions, whether it be tail and mail or check Postgres. There are a few others out there. I think POWA is another one. But there's a number of them out there, this being one of the ones that are easy to get in place as long as, like Vibor said, you make a few configuration changes to your logs up front that can get you to a point where you can figure out the data that's in front of you. You can get visual representation of it, figure out what's the slowest, and then kind of work your way to, assuming you've already assessed that as a database issue, work your way to understanding, is it a specific query, is it a set of them? And then from there, what needs to happen in order to fix the problem or improve the situation that the user finds themselves in. Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, so there's a lot more out there in terms of tools. We didn't touch on everything. One of the heaviest ones, especially if you're looking to get really deep into the mechanics of your queries as well as your performance, it does happen to be Postgres Enterprise Manager, as well as PgAdmin on a different side of things. And there's a host of others that may not be quite as broad reaching, but again, it comes back to understanding the problem and what your goal is before you jump into applying a specific tool. We do have a couple things coming up on the Postgres news side, so I wanted to shift gears for a couple minutes and look to Bruce specifically. What are we seeing in terms of news in the Postgres space? The release notes, perhaps?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing last Friday, I was able to post a link to the Postgres 13 release notes. I had started working on them probably maybe 3 weeks ago, and had finished them, I guess, 10 or 12 days ago. But then we had the community review them, and I added links to all the documentation sections, and finished that Thursday night. And then Friday morning was able to post those. So if you go to my blog or you go to the Postgres website, I think under the developer tab, there's a something about the code, and there's a build of the development docs. So probably the easiest way is just to go to my blog. But you can see a list of the 181 features that we have coming in Postgres 13. Again, there's nothing that really stands out that I can sort of off the top of my head. Again, standard partitioning improvements, replication improvements, improvements particularly in some of the optimizer hash join capabilities. There's a couple security things in there. So again, it's a rounded release, nothing really earth-shattering, but I recommend people to check it out. Again, we're expecting the release, beta release probably in a week, and then 10 days, and then probably the final in September, October.
Great, thank you. Speaking of security, I know that there was a recent patch that was provided. Vibor, could you provide a little bit of color around that?
Yeah, in the latest release, we fixed the CV to 2020-10733. According to this, the initial installer which we had for the PostgreSQL, it was giving the precedence of the libraries or commands which it is used to find in the current directory or present directory. So it was a kind of vulnerability. So you can think about if a hacker got a hack in your system, and the directory which you're using for executing the installer as an administrator, right? In that directory, if you put some kind of a command, system commands, which installer is calling, installer will use that command. So it's trying to give a precedence or preference to the command in the current working directory instead of taking it from the system. So it's a kind of vulnerability, and you can think about it can create a bigger issue in the system, because when you install a PostgreSQL, you install PostgreSQL as an administrator using the installer.
And
So
this is what platforms, Vibor?
this is only for Windows from
So Windows
9.5 to
installer, and only at installer time on
correct.
Windows is what the fix is for. Okay.
Right, so native Windows, right? If you're running, like, as an example, like the Linux framework or a subsystem, rather, you're not at risk for this necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is not for Linux, it's only for the Windows.
And only at
Windows.
install time. Got it.
Yeah, install time.
So it's
So that was a big
narrow window
vulnerability.
of risk, right? But something
Yeah.
meaningful enough that we got to get a patch out there for that.
Yeah.
If you
Again,
got a running system, you're good. But this is one of those things where if you could engineer the right scenario with an installer, you might be able to get somebody to escalate your privilege. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Especially if you're running in like an automated environment where you're doing a lot of install or build up and tear down frequently, right? Yeah.
Correct.
So those types of environments, like a CI/CD type framework, definitely something that could be in more need of this than your average static environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we
So,
certainly jumped into
yeah.
kind of the deeper end of PgBadger this time around. Again, we wanted to focus a little bit more towards what we've seen in terms of a problem that is common to not just our customers, but also what we see in Stack Overflow, DBA, Stack Exchange, and elsewhere, where before you narrow down your focus to the assumption that it's a database issue, step back and make sure that there's not a bigger problem going on, right? If you're in the kitchen and you smell smoke, make sure the house isn't burning down before you actually start to throw the fire extinguisher in there, right? All right, folks. Well, that brings us to the close of yet another episode. So I appreciate everyone's time here. And for those of you that are in attendance, thanks for coming, and keep your questions coming. You can either ask us on Twitter using the PostgreSPulse hashtag, or within LinkedIn, or send them to us at PostgreSPulse@enterprisedb.com. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back in 2 weeks, as there's a holiday stateside next week that will push us out by one session. But we'll see you soon. Take care.
So long.
Thank you.